Mara Bell did not see the folded notice until Silas Creed lifted it above the heads of everyone waiting outside the land office. It was a gray morning in Ellsworth County, cold enough that the horses steamed at the hitching rail, and every voice carried farther than it should have. Mara had come in for lamp oil, salt, and a spool of thread. Her son Caleb carried the little ledger she used for errands. Her daughter June had one hand buried in the back of Mara's coat, holding on without admitting she was afraid. Silas had chosen the place carefully, not the Bell place, where only the cottonwoods and the wind could hear him, not the road where Mara might have driven past without answering. He chose the plank walk between the land office and the mercantile, where clerks, teamsters, and two women from the church sewing circle had nowhere to look except anywhere but at them. He unfolded the paper with slow hands. He said the claim was in question now. He said a widow could not prove residence, cultivation, fencing, and permanent intent on a quarter section that had already swallowed a grown man. He said the examiner would understand that Mara had done what she could, but sentiment did not hold land. Then he softened his voice just enough to make the cruelty sound reasonable. He said his offer still stood. He would take the place into his name, keep the children from being uprooted, and settle the matter without embarrassment if she signed before the contest went any farther. Mara let him finish. The street noise thinned around her. A wagon creaked past the grain shed. Somewhere behind her, June's breath caught and stopped. Mara looked at the paper, then at Silas. "The place was my husband's work," she said. "It is my children's inheritance, and it is my name that will answer for it now." She did not raise her voice. She did not repeat herself. That made the silence worse. Silas folded the notice back along its creases and put it inside his coat. He smiled in the careful way of a man who wanted witnesses to remember him as calm. "We will see what the office says," he told her. Then he stepped down into the street and rode east. Nobody rushed away afterward. That would have admitted they had been watching. They only shifted, found reasons to check harness buckles, count parcels, read notices already read 3 times. Mara turned toward the wagon. Caleb climbed in first. June followed. Mara lifted the lamp oil, but the crate slipped against the wheel rim. Before the glass could strike, a pair of work-browned hands caught it. Martin Vale set the crate upright in the wagon bed, steady and quiet. He had been standing across the road by the freight shed with a coil of pump leather over one shoulder, close enough to hear everything, and far enough away not to make Mara's fight into his own. He did not ask if she was all right. He only stepped back, touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, and let her leave with her pride unhandled. Mara drove home without looking back. By the time she reached the Bell place, the light had gone flat over the prairie. The house sat low against the wind, with its sod-plastered walls and 2 crooked windows in the cottonwood stump where her husband had split kindling the last week before fever took him. The north fence sagged in 3 places. The south field had been turned, but not enough. The stable roof needed 2 new boards. All of it had been waiting before Silas Creed opened his mouth. His words had only made the work stand up straighter and show its teeth. The next afternoon, Martin Vale came by with his water wagon. He delivered to 3 claims east of the creek and kept no proper home of his own, only a cot in the back room of the blacksmith shop and a trunk under it. People said he had once owned land farther north and lost it to drought, debt, or bad judgment, depending on who told the story. Martin never corrected any version. He worked, paid what he owed, and spoke as little as the weather allowed. Mara was driving a fence staple into a cedar post when his team slowed. She did not turn at once. The wagon brake creaked. Boots dropped into the dust. Martin came to the fence line and looked down the run of wire, not at her face. He pressed the post she had just set. It held better than he expected. Then he asked, would a husband's signature make Creed wait long enough for the papers to speak? The hammer stayed still in Mara's hand. A crow moved along the dry field ridge. Caleb was somewhere behind the stable, pretending not to listen. June was in the doorway with one finger in her mouth. Mara set the hammer against the post. It would have to be filed before he brings the contest formal, she said. I know, and I would not sign over an inch. I would not ask for one. That was when she looked at him. Martin kept his hands on the top wire loose enough not to bend it. The claim stays yours. The house stays yours to order. I can put my name where it stops him from calling this place abandoned, that is all. Mara laughed once, without humor. That is never all. No, he said, but it can be all I demand. She looked past him at the field. Her husband had broken that ground with a borrowed team and a plow blade that kept catching stone. Every receipt was in the flour tin behind the stove. Every improvement had a date beside it. Every blister on her hands since September had been for a place Silas Creed wanted to call impossible. Martin followed her eyes to the house. "The children stay where their father is buried," he said. "That is the shape I can see." The sentence did not ask to be thanked. Mara picked up the hammer again. "Come after sundown. I will hear the rest at the table." He nodded and returned to the wagon. That evening, Martin came through the yard with his hat in his hand and stopped at the step until Mara told him to come in. He ate beans, salt pork, and yesterday's bread. He did not look around the house as though weighing its poverty. He did not try to charm the children. He answered June when she asked whether his horses had names, and when Caleb asked nothing at all, Martin gave him the respect of silence. After supper, Mara took the flour tin from behind the stove and laid the papers on the table. There were purchase slips for nails and hinge iron, a receipt for seed oats, a note from the surveyor, a page in her husband Eli's hand listing the dates the first fence posts went in, another page in Mara's hand continuing where his stopped. Martin studied the papers but did not touch them until she pushed them toward him. "There is enough here to show work," he said. "Enough to show work," Mara said. "Not enough to make certain men stop talking." "No," Martin said. "That is what the filing is for." Caleb sat on the floor near the stove, sharpening a stick with a pocket knife he had no need of. June had been sent to bed and had ignored the instruction by listening from the curtain. Mara saw Martin notice and say nothing. When the practical matters were finished, Mara put both hands flat on the table. "If this is done, my name remains on the claim. Yes, my children are named in any right that comes after me. Yes, the room behind the pantry is not yours. The bed in this house is not yours. You do not correct my children in my place." Martin nodded once. "There is space in the old smokehouse if I clear it." Mara studied him a moment longer. "You had already thought of that. I thought it best to say after you had." The wind pressed at the walls. The lamp flame leaned and came back. Mara gathered the papers and put them inside the flour tin again. "Then we file tomorrow." By the end of that week, the marriage had been witnessed by a deputy clerk, entered in the county book, and carried through town on tongues faster than any posted notice. People watched the next time Mara came for feed. They watched Martin load the sacks. They watched how close he stood, how little he touched, whether she gave an order, whether he took it. They watched Caleb climb onto the wagon by himself and June glance from her mother to Martin and back again. Everyone had a theory before they had a fact. Silas Creed had more than a theory. He had a grievance. He came into town twice that week and read the marriage entry himself. The second time he spoke to a man with a narrow black case who had come from the county seat and carried his papers as though papers could do the work of truth. Mara heard about it from Mrs. Havel at the Mercantile, who claimed not to gossip while giving every detail. Mara bought salt, lamp wicks, and one small bag of sugar because June had been brave the day of the filing. She gave no answer worth repeating. At home, the arrangement settled first through work. Martin rose in darkness and carried water before Mara had the stove hot. The first mornings he left before breakfast and returned after the children had eaten. On the fourth day, Mara set a wrapped biscuit on the porch rail. It was gone when she looked again. On the fifth day, the plate came back washed, with the crack in it turned toward the wall the way Mara always stored it. That was how the first kindness entered the house, not through a speech, through a plate returned correctly. Caleb tested Martin the way boys test weight on river ice. He asked for nothing. He watched everything. He watched Martin set the loose gate so it swung clear without dragging the dirt. He watched him mend the pump handle with an iron collar instead of twine. He watched him leave Eli Bell's tools on the same pegs where Mara kept them, not rearranged into some new man's order. One morning, Caleb appeared beside the south fence with a roll of wire under one arm. Martin was kneeling by a brace post. He glanced up. "That end will bite if you let it," he said. "I know. Then hold it like you know." Caleb did. They worked half the morning without naming what had changed. June came slower and more openly. She followed Martin at a distance when he fed the horses. She asked whether the gray mare remembered things. She asked if smokehouses were colder than regular houses. She asked why men sometimes had more shirts than words. Martin answered only the questions that had answers. One evening, when the table was set for 3, June climbed onto the bench, looked at the empty chair against the wall, climbed down again, and dragged it to the table. It scraped across the floorboards with a sound large enough to stop every hand in the room. Mara turned from the stove. Caleb looked at his sister as though she had walked into a thunderstorm on purpose. June put a spoon beside the fourth plate. Then she sat and stared at the beans in her bowl, daring no one to speak first. Martin came in from washing at the pump. He stopped at the doorway when he saw the chair. Mara waited. Martin crossed the room, sat where the child had put him, and said, "Thank you, June." June's chin dipped once, that was all. But after supper, when Martin went back to the smokehouse, Caleb stayed awake longer than usual, carving at the same scrap of pine until the shape of a small horse began to show. Silas came again in late November after the wind had stripped the grass pale and hard. He did not ride into the yard. He stopped at the road fence where the bell claim met the track and called for Mara as though the land itself owed him an answer. Martin was on the step rubbing tallow into a cracked harness strap. He looked up, saw Silas, and looked back down. Mara came from the stable with straw on her sleeve. Silas removed one glove finger by finger. He said he had no wish to embarrass her further. He said hasty marriages were looked at with suspicion, especially where property was involved. He said a contest board would weigh the true nature of the arrangement. He said certain neighbors might be asked whether Martin Vale lived as a husband or merely appeared when useful. Mara listened. The wind moved loose dust around Silas's boots. Behind her, Martin drew the harness needle through leather with the slow steadiness of a man refusing to perform for an audience. When Silas finished, Mara said, "The office will have our records after New Year. If you have questions, bring them there." Silas glanced over her shoulder. "Your husband has no answer?" Mara did not turn. "My husband is not the claim." Martin's needle paused, then went through. Silas heard the answer for what it was. So did Mara. So did Caleb from behind the stable door. Silas put his glove back on and rode away. That night the house felt smaller than usual, not because anyone had crowded it, but because the question Silas had left behind had filled every corner. After supper, June rested her chin on her folded arms and asked, "When the landmen are done, does Mr. Martin go back to the smokehouse forever?" Caleb whispered her name in warning. June did not look sorry. "I only want to know which chair is his," no one answered. Mara kept her eyes on the dishwater. Martin looked at the table grain. The lamp hissed softly. It was the right question. That was why it could not be handled. Winter shut them in before Christmas. For 2 days wind drove snow so hard against the walls that the windows whitened at the corners, and the animals had to be checked by rope line from the house to the stable. Martin slept in the kitchen those nights, boots beside the door, coat over the back of the chair June had dragged to the table. Mara did not speak of it, neither did he. On the third afternoon, with the storm still pressing low, Martin repaired the pantry shelf that had sagged since summer. He sharpened the draw knife, patched a split in Caleb's boot sole, and set June's broken doll chair back on 4 legs using a piece of kindling shaved thin. June watched that repair with solemn attention. Caleb watched the boot. Later, he brought the little wooden horse to Martin and held it out without looking at him. "The legs are wrong," Caleb said. Martin took the horse, turned it in his hand, and gave it back. "The front legs are waiting for you to decide if it is standing or running," Caleb frowned. "That matters?" "It matters to the legs." Caleb sat beside him on the floor. For an hour they worked by stovelight, talking in low practical voices about knees, fetlocks, and how weight sits in a body. Mara stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal mush, and listened without turning around. Because there are some mercies a woman must not stare at or they scatter. The hearing notice arrived in January. Silas Creed had filed a formal contest alleging insufficient residence, doubtful improvements, and fraudulent intent in the marriage. The land office set the matter for the second week of February, before thaw, and before any new work could soften the old record. Mara read the notice twice, then she took out the flour tin. For 3 nights after the children slept, she arranged every paper by date. Martin sat across from her and mended harness, repaired a glove, or simply kept the lamp trimmed. He did not tell her what to say. He did not take the pages from her hands. When she asked for a date, he gave it. When she asked whether a fence could be measured by rods in a statement, he said yes and showed her how it was written on the wire receipt. Mrs. Havel signed a statement saying Mara had remained on the place through September and October. Mr. Dorn, the blacksmith, signed that Eli Bell's plow repairs and later Martin Vale's hinge iron were for the same quarter section. A schoolteacher named Lita Marks signed that Caleb had missed 3 days in November because he had been helping his mother keep cattle off the wheat stubble after a fence break. Mara read that last statement for a long time. Caleb saw it and looked away. The morning of the hearing was so cold that the wagon wheels complained until the sun touched them. Mara wore her black dress. Not because she wanted pity, but because it was the plainest good dress she owned. Caleb and June stayed with Mrs. Havel. Martin drove. The horses breathed white into the road ahead. They said almost nothing on the way. There was no need to practice a truth lived that hard. The land office smelled of ink, damp wool, and coal smoke. Silas was already there with the man from the county seat. The man had a trimmed beard, a polished leather case, and the patience of someone paid to let other people grow nervous first. Mara did not grow nervous. She laid her papers on the table in order. When the examiner asked who spoke for the claim, Mara said, "I do." The first question was residence. Mara gave dates. The second was improvement. Mara gave receipts. The third was cultivation. Mara showed the seed purchase, the plow repair, the neighbor statement, and the page in Eli's hand listing the first breaking of the south field. The man with the leather case asked whether the work after Eli Bell's death could be properly counted if the household had lacked a legal head during the interval. Mara looked at him until the room noticed the question had insulted more than it had asked. Then she turned one page. "Here are the dates between my husband's burial and the marriage filing," she said. "Here is the wire purchased in that interval. Here is the north line repaired in that interval. Here is Mrs. Havel's statement that she saw me drive those staples myself." She slid the paper forward. No head was missing from the household, only a man. The examiner read the statement. Martin did not move. Silas did. The man with the leather case tried again. He asked Martin whether he claimed an interest in the property through marriage. Martin folded his hands on the table. "I claim my labor," he said. "The land is hers. The children come after her. My name was put where Mr. Creed tried to put a gap." For the first time that morning, Silas looked down. The hearing ended without drama. That almost made it harder. No one shouted, no one confessed, no gavel struck. The examiner gathered the papers, said he would issue a determination before spring planting, and dismissed them into the white afternoon. Mara walked out first. Martin followed with his hat in his hand. Halfway home she said, "You did not have to put it that plain." "Yes," he said, "I did." She watched the road. After a while she said, "Thank you." Martin kept his eyes on the team. It was already true. February dragged its weight across the county. The contest had not been decided, and that made every ordinary task feel like work done under a lifted boot. Mara patched, cooked, counted feed, and woke before dawn with the same thought waiting beside her. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Martin stayed steady. That was the thing about him that had begun to undo her. Not charm, not promise, steadiness. He checked the stable roof after every wind. He walked the fence even when snow made the line hard to see. He kept the smokehouse lamp burning late, a small amber mark at the edge of the yard. One evening Mara found him at the window looking toward the south field. "What is it?" she asked. "Corner brace is leaning." "I saw. I will set it when the ground lets go." "I know." They stood side by side watching a field neither of them owned in the same way, and both of them had somehow become answerable to. The house creaked in the cold. Mara realized she knew the sound of his step now. She knew the shape of his quiet, and when it meant tiredness, and when it meant thought. She knew he warmed his hands before touching a horse's bit. She knew he never sat in Eli's old chair unless June pulled it out first. Grief had not left the house, but it had stopped being the only thing with a place at the table. The determination came on a bright March afternoon while the thaw ran in silver threads along the wagon ruts. Mara opened the envelope with the bread knife because her hands would not manage the flap. Contest dismissed. Claim confirmed to Mara Bell with succession rights noted for Caleb and June Bell. She read it once, then again. Caleb read it over her shoulder, lips moving silently. June watched him because she trusted his face before she trusted words on government paper. When Caleb let out the breath he had been holding, June smiled. Mara folded the letter along its new crease and placed it inside the flour tin. Then she took it out again and set it on the shelf above the stove, where ordinary eyes could see it and remember. Martin was at the south corner, digging old rot from the brace hole. Mara stepped outside. "It is done," she called. He looked up. "We kept it." For a moment he did not answer. His shoulders lowered in a way that showed he had been carrying more than he had admitted. Then he nodded. Mara expected him to come in. He did not. He turned back to the brace hole and kept working, because some men do not know where to put relief unless there is a post waiting to hold it. Spring came unevenly, then all at once. The grass greened under last year's dead blades. The hens scratched farther from the door. June began leaving ribbons of string in the yard and calling them roads. Caleb finished the wooden horse and set it on the shelf without announcing it was finished. The Bell place did not become easy. No place like that became easy. The stable still needed shingles. The southfield still held stone. Flour still had to be counted close, and weather did not care whose claim had been confirmed, but the land no longer felt like something crouched beneath a threat. It felt like work. Work was a mercy. In April, with the door open and the evening coming soft through it, Mara cleared the supper plates and left Martin's chair where it was. He noticed. So did Caleb. June did not notice because she was trying to feed a bean to the wooden horse. Mara set both hands on the back of her own chair. "The claim is settled," she said. Martin looked up. "Your name did what it came to do. If you mean to go back to town, no one can say you left before the bargain was honored." The room changed shape around the words. Caleb's hand stopped near his cup. June finally looked up. Outside, the mare struck one hoof against the stable floor. Martin turned his spoon once beside the plate. "The corner brace is not set deep enough yet," he said. Mara held his gaze. "That is not an answer. The gray mare will foal before long. That is not an answer either." He looked down at his hands, roughened by her fences, her pump, her roof, her winter. Then he said, "I do not want to go back to town." June sat very still. Caleb looked at the window. Mara's voice was lower when she spoke again. "Then stay as my husband. Not as a paper between me and Silas Creed. Not as a name to frighten an office clerk. As yourself if you choose it." Martin looked at her for a long moment. "I choose it," he said. June smiled too quickly and tried to hide it behind her cup. Caleb stood, took the empty plates to the wash basin, and put Martin's on top of Mara's as though the matter had become ordinary already. By May, the smokehouse lamp was no longer lit at night. No one held a meeting about it. No announcement was made. The cot was folded, the trunk was moved, and June claimed the smokehouse for storing broken treasures no one was allowed to throw away. On the first warm evening after planting, Mara stood in the doorway and watched Martin come up the track with the wagon. June heard the wheels before anyone and ran from the garden, her braid half undone. Caleb came to the step with the wooden horse in one hand, still pretending it was not precious. The gate Martin had rehung swung clean on its iron strap. The south corner stood firm. The field beyond it held a thin green promise that belonged to no man more than to the hands that kept it alive. Mara looked over the yard. The place was not rescued. It had not been handed back by mercy. It had been held by records, work, courage, and one quiet name placed exactly where a thief had tried to make an opening. Martin climbed down from the wagon. June reached him first. Caleb waited, then went two slower, and with dignity. The house was warm behind Mara. The plates were set. The letter lay on the shelf above the stove. The land that had nearly been stolen stretched around them in the evening light, fenced and flawed in theirs. For the first time in months, Mara did not measure what could be taken. She only watched what had stayed.